Hi, my name's Dan, and this video is one in a series of videos that I'm doing about particle systems in the Unreal Engine using the Niagara plugin. And if you're following along in the series, there's been one that's given some outline information about particle systems and how they work. I've shown you how to enable Niagara. It's finally time to actually get digging into Niagara. And what I want to do in this video is give you some overview of the Niagara system and what the components are and what you might expect in there. So all I've got here is a third-person template map and nothing added at the moment. And I'm just going to create some content. I'm not even going to bother creating a folder for it. Just going to do it on the root of the content folder. So the thing that's appeared as a result of having the plugin enabled is this extra option here, effects, and the two that are important for us are Niagara System, which is near the bottom, and Niagara Emitter. So a quick rundown or a reminder of how particle systems work is that it's all about a very small, or don't have to be small, but multiple items that have similar behavior. And these are called particles, and they are created by an emitter. However, in Niagara, there's yet another level of organization, which is the system. And a system can have more than one emitter in it. Okay. So there are two ways to approach this in Unreal, which is you can create an emitter and then add it to a system. You can't put emitters on their own directly into the world, or you can create a system and get some emitters attached to it and then edit them. So we'll do this one first. We're going to create a system, and there's some wizards that come up depending on what you're creating. So I'm going to choose new system from selected emitters. You can create an empty system, which is basically starting from scratch. And then when I click next, the next thing it wants is for me to tell it what systems I want. I'm just going to chuck some in here. I'm going to throw in, there's a hanging particulates system, which is kind of like dust motes hanging in the air. There's let's do a directional burst system. So for each one of these, if you want to add it to the system that you're creating, so a directional burst emitter, you just need to highlight it and then click plus, and it adds it to this list down the bottom of the thing here. And let's have, tell you what, a fountain. There we go. Add that in. As you'll see down here, there's non-template and there's not in library. And there's also a difference here between there's an empty system. Let's have an empty system so we can show you that. And also a completely empty, which has two levels of empty. Okay, so I've now got 5 emitters coming into this system. And I'll just click finish. And let's call it NS for Niagara System. Let's call it full because it's got lots of stuff in it. Why not? So I'm going to double click on that to open it, and this opens the system editor. Now the system editor and the emitter editor are very similar, but there's just an extra level of stuff inside the system editor. And we've got a graph here that looks a bit like a blueprint graph, but it's not. And there's no wires to connect things together. And in here you can see, as I zoom in, there is NS full, so that's the name of the system. And this has some system stuff in here. And then we've got these brown ones are emitters 1. So that's the hanging particulates, that's the directional burst, the fountain, and there's the 2 empty ones, empty and completely empty. We can change the names of these if we want. So I'm just going to demonstrate that by changing the name of the hanging particulates to dust. Why not? Okay. So each of these, well, these 2 empty ones aren't actually doing anything, but each of these 3 here are doing different elements of what you can see over here. And we've got a timeline at the bottom that's coming through, and it will be cycling every few seconds. There we go, cycle back. So if we just have the the directional burst. So we can switch them on and off using these tick boxes there. So this should just have the directional burst. I'm not sure if I've actually seen it happening yet, so I'm just waiting for the timeline to come through, and I'm watching over here. There we are. It's just a small burst of particles there. And if we switch on the dust and take off that, we can hopefully start to see that dust that's hanging in the air. And similarly, if we switch them all three off, there's nothing, and we can put the fountain on. That's a continuous thing. What's going on there? Okay. So we can switch them individually on and off. We can also, if you want to if we've got several of these in here and we want to focus on one for a little while, is that there's a button here which is Enable Isolation, which is kind of like a soloing thing. So if I want the dust to be featured and the others not, if I click on that, then the text up here that's highlighting what's going on goes red just for that one, and it's showing me that in there. So that's a little bit of the editor. We're going to come back to it in a little bit, but I want to show you that to actually make something happen in the world, you need to take an instance of that and drag it into the world. And that's been set up so it's just the particulates. Now that looks very orange at the moment, and that's because that is the selected item, and it's just like selecting anything else. It's got orange around it, but it selects all the particles as well. So all the particles are outlined in that orange outline. So it's kind of like dust hanging in the air or snow that isn't falling properly. There we go. So I'm going to now show you, let's create a Niagara emitter on its own. Where are we? FX is where I need to be. Niagara emitter. And you don't have the choice of having an empty emitter here. You can only do that inside a system. So you can do new emitter from a template. Actually, I wonder, you might be able to choose the empty templates. And in fact, you can. You get empty and then the almost empty there. We'll go back and look at those empty ones in a little bit. Let's have the omnidirectional burst. So, as I said before, you can't actually take an emitter directly into the world. And just to demonstrate trying that, it says not allowed, can't do that. So if I want to edit that emitter, I can. If I double click on it, it opens the Emitter Editor, which, as you'll see, is very similar. It just doesn't have the system level stuff. Don't worry, I'm going to explore this editor in a bit more detail in a minute or two. So I could change the parameters of this, and that would affect the parameters in the system if I use it in a system. I'm just going to close both those editors down, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create another system without any emitters in it, so that I can show you how to add an emitter to a system. So at Niagara system, and we have a choice here, create empty system. So I'll finish that. So ns underscore empty, except it's not going to stay empty for long. I'm going to open this up. Now, I tried for several minutes before I worked out how to add an emitter to this. I was in here and I was clicking on various things, and it wasn't until I tried randomly right-clicking on the graph that I found the add emitter. So it's there. And the emitter that I've created, what did it get called? Very good question. Let's go back out to our editor. New Niagara emitter. Let's give it a better name than that. I'm going to call it. Let's get I want to open it for editing. There we go. NE for Niagara emitter. Mine. So back into the empty one. And add emitter, and I'm looking for any mine. There we go. And that's added that emitter in there. So once we've got an emitter here, let's have a look at what's going on here and some of the information that we've got. So each emitter's got loads and loads of stuff going on. And in fact, one of the problems that I have been facing, and a lot of people face with particle systems, is the sheer plethora and confusion that surrounds how much stuff there is going on here, and the amount of options that you've got. So there are some things that you need to know to be able to understand what's going on here. And for more detail on this, please see the first video in this series about how particle systems work. So in this, I'm just going to tell you that there are 6 groups of settings here, effectively. And as you highlight anything at any point, then this selection over on the right-hand side reflects what you've highlighted. So the more low level the thing is that you highlight, the fewer options appear over here. So if you highlight the whole thing, you actually get the ability to see everything and all the settings for everything in here. I'm just closing these down so you can see I've got similar kind of set. And the 6 groups that you've got here, there's the emitter settings, the emitter spawn, the emitter update, the particle spawn, the particle update, and the render. So the emitter settings obviously are settings that apply to the emitter as a whole. The emitter spawn is stuff to be controlled and to happen at the point where the emitter itself is created. And I've been messing about with particle systems. I'm not very knowledgeable about these things, I confess that. And this series is meant to get you going, to kind of scratch the surface. I've not yet found anything that uses any of the settings in the emitter spawn, so I'm not going to be touching that in this series of videos at all. The emitter updates, in subsequent videos, I am going to be looking at the emitter update, particle spawn, particle update, and render, which are the rest of them. But just to quickly say what they do, the emitter update is something that happens to the emitter, so that's the thing that creates particles, every time it updates. So that's the simulation frames. I'm not sure if it's the same as graphic frames, but it keeps going. It keeps over time. This keeps happening. The particle spawn is what happens when an individual particle is spawned, and you can see every time this has a burst, there's probably about a couple of hundred particles being spawned over that. And there's a whole lot of details about that. Particle update is the section that happens over time after a particle is spawned, and these things are happening to the particle until it gets to the end of its life. And particles usually have a lifespan and come to the end of their life at some point. Otherwise, you end up rendering them forever and you snarl up your graphics card very quickly. Then the final section is about rendering. So most of the information that you've got higher up is about the movements and positioning, and some of it might be about color. To be honest, there's loads of things in there. But the actual rendering is handled in the render section. And this is a Sprite particle system that we've got here. So we've got a Sprite Renderer. Okay. And again, I'll deal with this in more detail in a later video. So in each of these sections, you'll see that there are some things in between. And these are called modules. And the set of modules that you've got here has been determined by this preset, which is the Sprite Burst. Okay. And let's quickly go and show you back in the full one what an empty emitter looks like. So it still has some stuff in here. It's got an emitter state, it's got an initialized particle, it's got a particle state, and it's got a sprite renderer. So even when you say just a basic empty, it's got some of those modules in there. But a completely empty one only has emitter properties, and the rest, all the other groups are empty. So there's quite a lot of setup to be done to get that working. Okay. Let's go back to the other one. Looking on here. So as I highlight one of these, you get some details over on the other side. And there's loads of information, and there is a confusing amount of options that you can use over there. And I don't want to spend a lot of time, in fact, I don't want to spend any time looking at the details of these in this video, because I'm just trying to give you an overview. But I do want to show you that if you click on one of these, so a couple of things. One is that if you click on the plus in the group, it then brings up a drop-down box, and Oh, so many you can put in here. So there's a great big list of these, and finding what it is that you want is part of the problem. And then when you highlight one of them or you've created a new one, it comes, uh, it gets created inside the group, and you've got some values over here. Now, against these drop-down boxes, so we've got sphere location. This is going to give you a sphere radius. This means that the particles are going to be spawned within a sphere up here. So you could simply change that value by typing in a different number, and that should just be spawning in an area twice as big. And it kind of looks like that. But when you hit this drop down here, again, there's a load of different things you can put in here. And there's you can do curves, you can do maths, you can do you can see that there's cosines, there's um, a crazy amount of different options. We'll explore some of them in later videos to come. Dynamic inputs, linked inputs, and make them here. So, and as soon as you start putting new inputs in, so at the moment this is just a straightforward floating point number. If you suddenly say, I want to do, I'm going to do just pick one, divide float. It's then asking you for the float that you've got on the float you're going to divide it by. Okay, so that's curious. So you can put values in that. There's all sorts of different options here. So the way that these numbers are determined can get really complicated. The final thing in terms of the editor and where things are that I want to show you is over this side, parameters, is that there's some useful stuff here. And depending on the level that you've got highlighted, so if you highlight, yeah, you got particle attributes there. They don't disappear. I thought they were going to disappear. I'm sorry. So, for example, one of the ones that's really useful is age, the age of the particle. And if you hold on to one of these, let's highlight one of these, sphere location, hold on to one of these, and then start dragging it across. You can see over here in the parameters, there are various boxes that have highlighted in green, and these are places where you can drag and drop a particle in. So it makes no sense for this sphere location to be dependent on the particle age, but let's put it in anyway, because that's going to be 0, because when it's spawned, it's always 0. But we could maybe do it based on, let's see, if we got system age, and just drop that in, and that should start small. It's still small. I don't know if that's just because the preview. Drag one into the world. Does it get bigger over time? That was my imagination that it was going to do that. But I confess I'm pulling in things and thinking about doing them live, which is a dangerous thing to do. So I'll stop doing that. Let's put that back to, let's have a reset there. Reset to default value. Sphere radius 100. So that's useful. Okay. If you want to get rid of one of these modules, there are two ways of doing it. One is to highlight it and right click and delete, except this one can't be deleted. Sphere location. This one can't be deleted because it's inherited. Okay. The other thing you could do is you could click on this bin there. Again, it can't be deleted because it's been inherited. So let's just quickly add one. We're going to add an audio. Crazy to have audio in particle systems, you might think, but actually it's quite useful, or it can be when you get your sound going. There's sound to play, attenuation, there's all sorts of things there. I'm not going to go into audio in this video. This was just so I could create it and show you that this one is one that can be deleted. I can delete it from there, I can delete it using that bin there. So I guess the last thing to tell you, and I've maybe not done this in the best order, but is that within a group, the order that these modules appear is important. And as they go through, as the particle spawns, it goes through these in order. So you can actually supersede one of these modules by putting another module in. So a color one is a particular example of that. If you Let's demonstrate that. So if I give a color to the particles, doing that in the particle spawn, this kind of purpley color, and if I then add another one after it, which is the same, this will override the previous one, and I'm going to make it kind of green, that'll contrast. But I can, these have got tick boxes, I can switch that one off, and so the purpley one takes over. It's good to make sure you don't have modules that are being overridden, because you're wasting processing power here by having both of those two active. But that's partly to show that the order of this is important. Sometimes when you stick a new module in, and I'll try putting the force module in here, acceleration force, you get this brown box coming up over on the right hand side that says this module has unmet dependencies. And the reason for this is because it adds a new one to the bottom, and where it really should be is up there, and I've just pulled and dragged it, and that has solved the problem. So if I pull that back there, it's probably going to give me the brown message again, and there's a button, fix issue. I click that and it just moves it above. I'm a little bit curious as to why they didn't, if they know the solution and they know there's a problem, why they don't just automatically make that happen. But they've obviously left that as a choice for you to do, or you can ignore it. Maybe that's it. Maybe you wanted to do something with this acceleration force in some other way later, so you need to click to ignore it. So that, I hope, is most of the elements of particle systems and how the editor works and how you can get into it. We're going to, over the series of videos, we're going to look at each of these different parts in turn: the emitter update, the particle spawn, the particle update, and the render down the bottom. So that's it from me for now.